My name is Emil Pakarklis. I'm the founder of iPhone Photography School, and in this short video you're going to discover how to use soft light and hard light for taking beautiful, well-lit iPhone photos. So we're going to look at the difference between soft light and hard light. You're going to find out in what conditions you can encounter each type of light, and most importantly, you're going to find out how to use each type of light for taking beautiful iPhone photos that everyone adores. For this video, we've partnered up with Eric Mueller, and Eric Mueller is a world-class iPhone photographer as well as a professional photographer from Minneapolis. Eric's iPhone photography has won him several awards, including the first place in the 2015 Mobile Photography Awards for Architecture and Design. Eric's outstanding iPhone photos have also gathered him over 50,000 followers on Instagram. But now, without further ado, let's switch to Eric. And in this video, Eric is going to show you the difference between soft and hard light and how you can use this difference for taking outstanding photos with your iPhone.
Let's spend some time talking about different kinds of light. In today's tutorial, we're going to talk about how to use soft and hard light for taking great iPhone photos. So what is soft light and what is hard light? You might have heard those terms before, but what do they mean? I'm going to show you some examples of what soft and hard light look like, and we'll also look at some photos that I've shot that use soft light and hard light so that you can understand the differences between these two kinds of light and when you might want to use one or the other to take a great iPhone photo. First, we should start with some definitions. Soft light is when a light casts a diffuse shadow with soft edges. And what do I mean by diffuse? I mean that the light is kind of scattered in a bunch of different directions, and it makes for a shadow that has a very soft edge. There's a gradual transition from darkness to light on the edge of the shadow. On the opposite side, hard light has a very distinct shadow. The transition between dark and light is very small, and the shadow has a very crisp edge to it. I think the easiest way to think about it is that on a cloudy day, you have very soft, diffuse light. You have shadows, but they don't have these crisp edges to them. It's a little more gentle, and the light kind of wraps around your subject. Whereas on a sunny day, you have very harsh shadows with a crisp line. That's the easiest way to remember the difference between soft light and hard light, is what light looks like on a cloudy day versus what light looks like on a sunny day. Let's take a look at a demonstration so you can see what I'm talking about. First, let me show you what soft light looks like. Here I have a teacup that I got from my kitchen, and you can see that it is casting a soft light. We know that because the shadows over on the left there have a very gradual transition from light to dark. The shadow is not exactly in the shape of the teacup. It's roughly in the shape of the teacup, but if you just looked at that shadow by itself, you might not know exactly what's casting it. You can see that it is darkest right next to the teacup, and the further away we get, the lighter it gets until it's almost hard to tell where the shadow ends. That's because we have a very soft light on this teacup here. Soft light is often associated with portraits because soft light tends to look really nice on people's faces. It casts a gentle, even light. It fills in those wrinkles that you might have. And it doesn't have any of those harsh shadows in people's eye sockets or anywhere on their face. It can make for just a gentle, even light that's very, very pleasing. Let's take a look at some photos that use soft light. This first photo here is a portrait of a man. You can see it's shot on a winter day, and it's very overcast. And there's also snow on the ground reflecting light up from the sky, so there's just a lot of general soft light all around. And you can see that on his face. It is mostly evenly illuminated. There are some shadows. You see some shadows on his smile lines there, and you can see it gets a little bit darker underneath his hat, but the transition from light to dark is very gradual there, and it has a soft edge. This, I think, is a pleasing use of soft light because it doesn't call attention to any features of his face, like there's not a long shadow from his nose or anything like that. It just so you can focus on what his face looks like. This next example is of some lilacs that I picked and decided to photograph by holding them in my hand. This was also shot on an overcast day, and you can see that it is a soft light because of the shadows that the lilacs create in my hand. You can't see a distinct edge to any of the flower shadows. There's just a general darkness underneath the lilacs, as you would expect from a soft light. Soft light is nice for a photo like this because it lights up inside every flower so you can see what's going on in there. It really comes more just about the color and the texture and not so much about the shadows in this photo, which I think is nice for this particular photo of flowers. The last example of soft light that I want to show you is of this small red chair that is on this little road in the middle of the forest. We can see that the light is coming up through a gap in the trees over the road, and it's coming straight down on the chair. If you look at the shadow, you can see that where the direction of the light is coming from. We can also see by looking at the shadow that it does not have a distinct edge. There's a very gradual transition from the darkness to the lightness. It's a little bit hard to tell exactly where that shadow ends. I think that's nice for this photo because I didn't really want this photo to be about the shadow. I really wanted it to be about the color of the chair on this road. And I think the color and the chair itself stand out a little bit more when there's not a harsh light and a really distinct shadow that would distract your eye from the shape of the chair. So those are some examples of photos that I've shot that use soft light effectively. Now let's take a look at a demonstration of what hard light looks like using the same teacup that we used before. You can see if I turn a light on that this teacup has a very hard shadow. Look at the edge of the shadow here, how distinct it is. There's a very crisp line between dark and light. The shadow looks like the teacup itself. You can really tell what it is just by looking at the shadow. In fact, the shadow helps you understand what we're actually looking at. It's a little bit hard to tell maybe at first that you're looking at a teacup, but the shadow gives you additional information about what you're seeing here. That's a nice use of hard light, when it gives you some clues about what you're actually looking at in an image. Now let's take a look at some photos that use hard light. This first photo is of a woman who is jumping in front of this yellow wall, and you can see where the light is coming from. It's coming from way up high above her, and look how distinct her shadow is. You can see the shadow almost looks like another version of the jumping woman. That's because this was lit by the sun. There were no clouds at all that day, and so this very hard light is shining down on her. And for me, this makes the photo interesting because she's lit really well, but part of the joy of the photo is that there is this shadow behind her. There's a second version of her jumping at the same time. It tells you how far away from the wall she is, but it also creates like an echo of her. So this is a good example of when hard light is nice to have. I think this would have had a very different feeling if it had been lit softly. I think she would have looked nice, but you wouldn't have gotten that fantastic shadow behind her. This next photo again uses hard light. It is of some steps on an oil tank that I shot a year or two ago, and I flipped it upside down because I thought it would make the photo more interesting. Nevertheless, what you can see are the shadows that are being cast by this stairway onto the circular edge of the drum of the tank. And of course, the shadows are perhaps the most interesting part of this photo. and they have a very nice distinct edge because there is a hard light on them. The third photo that I want to show you is again of this little red chair that I have, and this was shot in hard light. As you can see, the shadow of the chair is quite distinct, as is the shadow of this structure that the chair is sitting in. It's a skyway here in Minneapolis, which is a raised hallway that connects a couple of buildings so you don't have to go outside in the wintertime. The skyway is made up of all of these individual panes of glass that are connected by mullions, and all of these mullions are casting shadows on the carpet. To me, this seemed like an interesting photograph because of what the hard light is doing to those mullions. It's casting these distinct shadows on the floor, which makes for a very interesting, if busy, pattern. So those are 3 examples of how you can use hard light in your photography. I intentionally skipped something earlier because I wanted to show you some samples of soft light and hard light. But let's go back and talk about what causes light to be hard or soft. There are 2 things. Number 1 is how big is the light source. The bigger the light source, the softer the light. The smaller the light source, the harder the light. So if you think about the example I was giving you earlier about a sunny day and a cloudy day, on a cloudy day, your light source is very big because your light source is the entire sky. It's all of those clouds in the sky. That is a giant light source that is casting light down on you, and that's what makes the light very soft. If you think about a sunny day, yes, the sun itself is quite big, but relative to you at that moment, it is just a tiny little thing in the sky. And because the light source is so small relative to you, or relative to your subject, it casts a very hard shadow. The second thing that determines how soft or hard light is the distance between the light source and the subject. If the light source is very close to the subject, the light will be softer. And if the light source is very far away from the subject, the light will be harder. So those are the 2 things that determine how soft or hard a light is. Number 1 is the size of the light source, and number 2 is the distance between the light source and the subject. Let me show you what I mean with a simple demo. Let's go back to our teacup, and in this time I'm going to bring the light source in closer to the teacup. That is doing 2 things. It is making the light source bigger than it was when it was much farther away relative to the teacup, and it is also decreasing the distance between the light source and the teacup. So as we expected, the closer the light gets and the bigger the light gets relative to the teacup, the softer the shadow becomes. Take a look way over here on the left-hand side, and you'll see that the shadow has a very gradual transition from dark to light. If I move the light far away again, you'll see that the farther it gets and the smaller it gets, the harder the shadow becomes. So this one light can be either a hard light or a soft light depending on how close we have it to our subject, because of the distance and also because of the relative size of the light compared to the subject. Let me show you one more example of hard and soft light so that you can more easily recognize it and understand what is causing it. First of all, let me just say hi to all of you. That's me, Wave Eric. And let's stop for a second and take a look at the light on my face. You can see that I have the light is coming from the right side of the frame. That's because I'm standing in front of this doorway about to go out onto my deck. The light is casting a pretty soft shadow. You can see that I've got some shade on the left side of my nose there and underneath my cap, but it's generally a soft light. That's because I'm not in the direct light. I'm in some indirect light right now. But watch what happens if I go outside, and you can see that it is a partly cloudy day out there. Right at the moment, there are no clouds in front of the sun. You can see my trellis is casting some distinct lines behind me, and that I've got some pretty harsh light on me. But when the sun goes behind a cloud, all of a sudden the light becomes a lot softer. The shadows from the trellis go away, and the light on my face has much softer shadows. Pay particular attention to the shadow that my nose is casting. I have kind of a big nose, and when the hard light comes out, like you can see the sun just came out from behind some clouds, you can see I have a very long shadow from my nose there. Fortunately, I'm not that self-conscious, so it doesn't bother me. I've accepted that my nose is on the big side. So that gives you a good example of how lighting conditions can change whether the sun is behind a cloud or not. And you need to pay attention to that depending on whether or not you want to have soft light or hard light. So by now you should have a really good idea of what soft light is and what hard light is, and also what causes each of them. By paying attention to light and the qualities of it, you can become a better photographer. Thanks very much for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode.
I hope you enjoyed this video by Eric Mueller, and by now you should have very good understanding of the difference between hard light and soft light, and how you can use this difference for taking outstanding photos with your iPhone. Now, as I said before, Eric Mueller actually produced an entire course for us covering all sorts of different aspects of using light in your iPhone photography, and the video you just watched is actually just one out of the 6 video lessons from this course. But Eric isn't the only person we've partnered with at iPhone Photography School, and actually for our iPhone Photo Masters program, we've recorded a total of 18 courses with different world-class iPhone photographers. So in the next free video that you're going to get in a couple of days, you will have access to another world-class iPhone photography expert. Her name is Jill Emmer, and in this video you're going to discover how to take beautiful iPhone photos of mountains and forests. A common problem that people encounter when taking photos of landscapes, particularly of famous landscapes that you might find in a national park, for example, is that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have taken the exact same photo that you're about to take. And obviously, that's not a creative way to approach photography. So in the next video, Jill Emmer is going to share some tips for how you can capture beautiful and unique iPhone photos of these famous landscapes so that your photos aren't the same as the photos that everyone else is taking. So that's what you're going to discover in the next free video. But now, before you go, please leave a quick comment below telling me and Eric whether you prefer to take photos in hard light or in soft light. So just leave a quick comment and tell us whether you prefer hard light or soft light, and I'll see you in the next video.